Are you someone who believes that acquisition should lead to opportunity in business? Do you have the wherewithal and savvy to have the entrepreneurial spirit necessary for sustainable success? And can you envision yourself making a long-term investment into the capital, both financially and emotionally, it takes to be a successful and shrewd entrepreneur? If you answered yes to any of the questions I just posed to you, boy am I glad you stumbled upon the conversation I had with Adrian Knight. Knight buys and sells businesses for a living, and along the way, he has developed a multi-million-dollar educational group from the ground up, which he was inspired to do, in large part, due to his 4-year-old daughter. However, if you ask Knight what his secret sauce is in business, he'll tell you that growing and developing his personal growth and development is his secret weapon when it comes to entrepreneurial and personal success. He regularly appears in multiple publications, including M&A, Entrepreneurship, Small Business Growth, and Personal Development. He regularly appears in M&A conferences and has mentored over 50 entrepreneurs who are looking to acquire and exit businesses and grow their pipeline of opportunity. If you're in a position where you need to, as an entrepreneur, turn around and save your businesses or put it on an opposite trajectory than what it currently is on, this is a conversation that you cannot afford to miss. So without further delay, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Adrian, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. I'm delighted to be with you to talk about your business and personal journey today. Thank you for joining me across the pond today, and it's delightful to see you, my friend.
Likewise, it's a great honor to be on here, Kevin. I'm thoroughly grateful for it.
Absolutely, my friend. And I wanted to start our conversation by asking you about your self-discovery journey that you went on in 2015. I know you've been in the business acquisition game for a while, but self-discovery is really important to you. So I'm wondering if we can start our conversation by you describing your self-discovery journey and how it impacted the person you are today.
Absolutely. So the great lesson that I think I've, in hindsight, learned over the course of my life, above everything else, is that I've always been very ambitious and always wanted to achieve success in the sort of traditional sense, how a lot of us, not everyone, but how a lot of people sort of think about it. But what I've realized, and the great insight that I've come to, is that it's a personal journey. And so as I have stepped into becoming more of my authentic self and stepped into more of being true to who I am, purely from a place of wanting to be authentic rather than trying to achieve anything external, that's when the external rewards and external sort of validation has come from, if that makes sense. It's very much been a inside out process rather than you achieve the success and then you become validated. For me, my great lesson has been it's been the other way around.
And tell me, during this journey, what's the one thing that you've been most surprised to learn about yourself?
One thing I've been most surprised to learn about as a whole has been that success is subtraction. So it's when I've taken things away from my life, when my life has moved forward. So to give you an example, I've been alcohol free for just over 5 years now. I've not had any alcohol whatsoever. And I done that for me, like for various reasons that I had for wanting to do it personally. But I was absolutely amazed to see what happened over that 12-month period after giving up alcohol. My business quadrupled in size. I had relationships that fell away and more meaningful relationships come into place. My health, probably not too surprisingly, increased quite considerably as well. It just touched every area of my life. And when I look back to other things such as smoking, I was smoking cigarettes for about 10 years and various other sort of vices and negative behaviors. Is when they have been taken away, that's when the big leap forwards have happened.
Yeah, and I know, Adrian, that education is also important to you, and your 4-year-old daughter helped you to inspire, to create an educational system from the ground up. So tell me about the relationship you have with your daughter and how she inspired a new business venture for you.
Yeah, so just before I learned that we were expecting Evie, I was in a place with my business where I wasn't particularly happy. I mean, I had grown a business from like a startup, and I had around sort of 8, 9 employees. It was like an okay sized small business, but I was very unfulfilled, and I was working long hours, and I was just spending a lot of time reflecting on, what's the point? What is it? Is this even worth it? Like, there's got to be more to life than like money and just that, again, that sort of external success. And then when I discovered that we were having Evie, my daughter, that's when something switched inside of me, and I started looking at things from a different perspective. So rather than thinking about what do I want, I started thinking more about what type of dad do I want to be for Evie? How do I want her to grow up? What type of examples do I want to set? And that sort of started a journey where I recognized that for me, I've always been very entrepreneurial, but it had to be more than just the money. It had to be about a contribute. There had to be the social benefit there, like a real social benefit. There had to be some contribution. And so as Evie was born, and we started going to children's groups, so these different like play groups and groups where they learn core skills, I became fascinated in this world of children's education, and looking at it thinking, this is so fragmented. It was so disconnected, and I just felt that there was a different way of doing things where if you could try to bring even just a few of the elements together, it would have a much different experience for the parents, but more importantly, it would offer a more integrated learning experience for the children. And so that sort of insight led me to bringing in my skill set of buying and selling businesses. And over a period of, it was just 2 years, 24 months, I went from a complete newbie to the sector, no real idea other than having Evie had just turned 1 at the time. So other than having a 1-year-old daughter, I had no real experience in the sector. Then 24 months later, we had 3 companies, 17 employees, and a multi-million revenue. And at that time, we was educating just under 10,000 under 5-year-olds every academic term. So it's sort of taken on a life of its own quite quickly.
So yeah, absolutely, and it's helped a lot of children in their educational journey, I'm sure. But Adrian, I'm also curious to ask you about an integrated learning experience and how you've really sort of evolved that term since you've got into the business. So, what does that mean to you now versus what it meant to you when you started this educational journey?
Such a great question, Kevin, because for me, from the very beginning, from day one, it was about creating this integrated educational experience. And the only thing that has changed since, like from today, since at the very beginning, was I've swapped the name education for learning. And that's largely due to in Britain, in the UK, you can only use the word education in certain formats, so you have to be like accredited, not in all areas, but in certain ones. So I switched that to learning, so that it was essentially meaning the same thing, but it has slightly different semantics. But that hasn't changed, and that is the center of everything that we do, even down to every decision that I need to make. I'm always asking myself, like, what about the kids? How does this take us towards or take us away from building that integrated learning experience? So that hasn't changed. In terms of what I mean by an integrated learning experience, there's in England, you have these educational frameworks that the government publishes, and essentially it's what all of the schools, all of the kindergarten facilities, they all follow these core frameworks. And for me, that integrated learning experience is bringing those frameworks together, so that if a child is doing physical activity outside, like, they're not just developing physically, they're also being put into situations where they can develop their social abilities as well, and where they can develop other key skills within that one activity. So it's trying to bring it all together to optimize the development of our children, who are our future generations, of course, our future leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adrian, at the heart, you describe yourself as a acquisition entrepreneur. You buy and sell businesses, and you help people either exit or turn around their businesses. So, at the heart of it, what does an acquisition entrepreneur mean to you? How do you define that term?
Yeah, so one of the big insights that I got from a business perspective, and it only really occurred to me just 2 or 3 years ago, was that I am a terrible, absolutely terrible, what a term is like, startup entrepreneur. So I had 12 failed startups prior to when I started to see business success. And looking back in hindsight, I recognized that my skill set wasn't being fully utilized when starting a business from scratch. And I was quite good at getting the idea and getting the thing moving, but then as soon as it had a little bit of momentum, that's when everything fell apart, because I lacked certain skills and abilities, such as systems and processes and other key important areas you need when building a business. Whereas an acquisition entrepreneur is someone who essentially buys established companies. So you're buying an established company and you're going in, and without exception, every single one of those companies will have problems. Like, it's the nature of being a business owner. You will always have business problems. And so the key role of an acquisition entrepreneur is, after buying a business, you're essentially going in and figuring out, how can we fix this? Like, because they quite often have quite big problems. So how can we fix this problem? How can we solve this to get the business working properly again? So another sort of like term for it is like business turnaround. So you're acquiring a business and then you're typically turning it around. And I found that that was far more suited to my skill set. So so it was just understanding the different flavors of an entrepreneur and being more authentic about what one I was more than the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adrian, you earlier shared with me a bit about your personal growth journey, but I'm also curious to ask you about the importance of men going on sort of their own self-discovery journey, because typically men aren't the type of people who want to express their inner feelings and say about their own personal discovery journey, because men want to portray oftentimes the protector of a family
Mm.
or the macho sort of figure in a family. But tell me, how important is it for men to really lean in to being vulnerable? How can that help them grow as individuals?
Well, it goes back to that sort of inside out realization that I've had, and for a long time I ran away from my feelings, from my inner demons, from that inner work I needed to do. But it was only when I stopped and started to open myself up to confronting those, that's when I physically saw myself become a real man, because I was I was bringing together the courage to face this stuff, even though I didn't want to. And this is all like a private, personal. It was me against me type thing. But as I started to address those, that's when I started to notice myself just in everyday life, thinking I'm more of a man now than I ever have been. And it was because I had done like confronted those inner feelings, etc. Running away from it, it made me less of a man, because I didn't have the courage to face it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so just building on that, I'm curious about your definition of elite masculinity, and what does that mean to you?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, elite masculine, for me, it comes down to balance more than anything else. It's yin and yang. It's being masculine, but also being connected and having an awareness and understanding of that feminine side, but not not letting that not letting that balance come out of place. It's being whole and wholesome and authentic more than anything else. It's being authentic to who you are as a man. It's being purpose driven. It's setting an example. It's being disciplined. It's being strong, but it's also being open and vulnerable, and being able to connect with your emotions and with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adrian, as a dad and your experience in the educational system, I'm also curious to ask you your a sort of view on the current quality of education from a global perspective. Do you think we're really doing our best to educate our kids today, or do you think there are gaps that need to be addressed?
I think there are some major gaps in our educational system across the world. I think the educational system is a bit like the old railways and the old water sewage systems, certainly that we have here in England, especially London, in that they were adequate 100 years ago, but people have evolved. The world has evolved, but some of the systems, especially the educational ones, haven't evolved to the same pace. I think that there's a lot of very talented, skilled children in particular that go unnoticed and that go underserved, because they don't fit into the status quo of the educational system as it is. And I think that needs to be recognized, and I feel like there needs to be different options for different people.
Yeah, a 4-year degree isn't for everyone, and putting everyone in a box isn't really the best way to go these days. So, well, with that as a backdrop, Adrian, I'm curious, how do you define an inclusive education then, where everyone has a chance to sort of thrive in an educational setting? So, what's your definition of an inclusive education?
So, an inclusive education to me is first recognizing that as people, we are multifaceted. And so, a lot of the educational system is geared up to our intellectual capabilities. It's, how high is your IQ is the classic example. Second to that are our physical capabilities. So people winning scholarships and awards and accolades for their physical accomplishments. But as people, we're not just our brains and our bodies. We're also much more than that. We have spiritual sides, we have emotional sides, and they tend to go largely unnoticed in our educational system. And I feel it needs to be more balanced because I'm a great example in many ways because from a traditional sense, I have a low IQ. My IQ is not very high, but my EQ is very high. And so that was never recognized. So I scraped through academically and just about made it through my exams. But there was other areas in life where, and certainly other professions and things where they could have been better paths, or those skills could have been developed in preparation for those paths.
Yeah, and from a business perspective, I know that mentorship is a big part of what you do. You've mentored over 50 acquisition entrepreneurs on how to grow and exit their businesses using the M&A method. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about it and why the power of mentorship is so important to you.
Yeah, first of all, I have at any one time I've got 3 or 4 mentors in my life and covering different aspects. So currently I've got 2 different business mentors coming from different angles. I've got a health and fitness mentor, etc. So I've always understood the benefit of having someone with more experience help guide you and help you in your own journey. The mentoring that I've done over the years is not something I've really sort of like searched for. It's more people have approached me, particularly as they've seen like the business grow so quickly and seen certain again of that sort of external success, and people sort of asking, how can you show me to do what you're doing because something's clearly working. And so it's just sort of gone from there really. But yeah, I feel like with mentoring, it's like it is personal. You can't have some structured program per se, which again, like the educational system, trying to shoehorn everyone in. It's understanding people on a more personal level and helping them with their particular sort of journeys.
Yeah, so just building on that, I'm also fascinated to ask you, what do you think is the key to mentoring entrepreneurs to reach their fullest potential? Because, as you said, every case is different. So, what do you think is the key to reaching and maximizing business potential?
So I will always go back to without question, it's the person. It's not the business, it's the person. So again, in my personal journey, my business life took off after I had prioritized my own personal growth and prioritized keeping myself healthy and investing in myself. That's when everything took off for me. So using the acquisition, like mentoring, for example, like we do that, but we spend even more time focused on like the person. So, you know, are they exercising regularly? Are they eating? And we track all that, and what habits are they proactively building that will move them forward. So I will always go back to the person over the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Adrian, I'm curious to ask you your definition of elite managerial leadership. And how do you think we can inspire employees to follow us as business owners or leaders of companies? So, how do you define elite managerial leadership?
So the term that comes to mind that we say practically on a daily basis within my businesses is we hire for attitude, train for skill, and we live by that. Now, to make that come to life, you have to have a very clear vision that is consistently communicated that people are bought into. Once they're bought into that, or when you know they're bought into that, is then hiring the right people with the right attitudes, regardless of whether they have the skills, and putting them into place, like into the place that will bring out their best, but with a lot of bandwidth to be able to go forward and try and experiment rather than the micro management. So for me, that elite management sort of leadership is very much finding good people and setting them free. And that's worked incredibly well for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adrian, I know that at the heart of what you do and your passion is really business turnaround. I know that you've helped franchises on the brink of bankruptcy, and all walks of businesses in the business turnaround process. So tell me, what's the key to turning around the business and making sure it can find a sustainable path forward?
Yeah, so the key to business turnaround is, I mean, there's a couple of elements. So it's having a vision on where the business can go, first and foremost. And quite often when you're going into these businesses, there is no vision. Like the owner has sort of mentally and emotionally checked out a long time ago. Once you have that vision, you can see that vision is having a blueprint. So there's certain levers and certain mechanisms that you can work on quite quickly that will start to shape up the business. And then the third component to that, the final component to that in many ways, is also understanding at what point you need to step back as the person leading the turnaround and start to put in sort of structured management and structured people. So if you stay in there too long, if you're too focused on the turnaround, then what will happen is you end up creating more chaos than is necessary. But if you don't stay in there long enough, then you don't have enough time to implement the immediate changes. So it's a balance.
That's interesting. You ended that question that way, and it actually leads into my next question and asking you about avoiding business burnout as entrepreneurs or business owners and finding striking the right balance. So, how do you avoid business burnout in your view and really find that balance to live a full life where your business is important, but the other aspects of your life also play a part? So, what are your thoughts there?
Yep. So it goes back to the person. So, I mean, I've had burnout several times over the course of my sort of entrepreneurial career, but I've not had it for quite some time. And it's kind of counterintuitive because so my morning routine, as an example, I'm up at 4 a.m. every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and I follow a very structured routine between 4 to 7:30 when I'm not answering emails, I'm not speaking to people like on my phone or even in person, like in terms of like friends and family. I'm just focused on working on me. Now, what that does is you wake up at 4 a.m. and you're tired and you've got all these like negative thoughts going around. And I always say it's like you're a level 2 or level 3 version of yourself, but you go through this routine, and by 7:30 that morning, you're so pumped up, you're so energized, you feel so full up internally because of the focus and investment you've placed on yourself, that you're going into your day as like a level 6, level 7 version, maybe even a level 8 version. And what that does, the knock-on effect that has throughout your day is substantial. Like, I can't even begin to put words to this, because you're going into your day a much higher version of yourself. And as that higher version, you see things much more clearly, you have a lot more energy, and so you tend to find like you're prioritizing on the right things. And if anything, I work less now on my business, and even though the business is, much bigger than it's ever been, but I'm working on the right things rather than trying to do everything. The big error that I made for years, and that I see like so many other people make, is that they always put the business first and they put themselves at the bottom of the list. But that is going to lead to burnout without question.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Adrian, I wanted to ask you about inclusivity in business because, I'll share just a little bit about myself. Anyone that watches or listens to this podcast knows that I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. But one of my passion projects is helping businesses build a more inclusive culture and infusing folks with disabilities into the workforce. So when we talk about business acquisition or business ownership, what do you think is the key to diversifying our approach to business to making it more inclusive? What are your thoughts there?
I think it's very similar to the educational system, and that it's recognizing that as people, as human beings, there's far more many aspects to us than the ones that we place value on in terms of our educational system, i.e., our mental intellect, our IQ, or in a business setting as well. There's far more aspects to people, but we seem so blinkered on like the IQ in education, for example, just as a simple example. And so I feel like the key to inclusivity and expanding that is more about expanding our perception on what it means to be human and what we as people have to offer, because we don't all fit in a box, and we don't want to as well. Like, we're like our diversity and our uniqueness is what makes us so remarkable. But it seems that only certain aspects of that are celebrated and rewarded in the material world.
Mm-hmm. And Adrian, I'm curious to ask you, because I know that you're a speaker, a motivational speaker as well, and I'm curious to ask you your version of defining success as a speaker, and what goes into being a successful speaker and really connecting with people and adding value. What are your thoughts there?
I think the key word that you said, it's all about connection, and it's about people being able to relate. Like, the worst thing in many ways, if you're standing up stage and talking to people, is that you're putting yourself on a pedestal, or even worse, like those people are putting you on a pedestal, because at the end of the day, we're all people. We're all, a man's a man and a woman's a woman. Like, we're all people, and it's understanding that we come from different paths of life, different walks of life, and we have different journeys each of us have to go on, personal, spiritual, physical, etc. But fundamentally, we are the same. We are connected, and it's just recognizing that, and that connection normally comes through telling relatable stories and being able to say that, okay, I may have done this, but I wasn't always there, and I started lower than low in terms of sort of emotional well-being, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Adrian, I'm curious to ask you about your thoughts on setting your own standard of excellence because I often tell people, because when I talk to people, I tell them the only set of expectations you have to meet are your own, because it's harder to meet anyone else's expectations if you don't know how to set a fundamental sort of uh, cornerstone for yourself. So talk to me about setting your own level of expectations and how important is it that you have your own set of values before you sort of enter the world. Because if you don't pour that individual foundation, it's harder to show up for other people, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. And getting clear on what your values are and what's important to you is one of the highest leverage activities and one of the most productive activities you could possibly do. Yet very few of us do it because it is hard. It requires thinking. It's not a hard activity in and of itself, but it requires sitting down and really thinking about this and reflecting and analyzing. And one of the great tools that I've sort of developed for my own, like purely for me, for my own personal growth is I call it Adrian Knight's Bible, which is nothing more than like within that I list out what is it that I value. What are my top five values? What are my bottom five values? What is my definition of success for me, and all of these other like aspects, and I review it on a weekly basis without fail. I review it on a weekly basis and I remind myself this is what I'm about, this is me. And having that level of clarity it's had such a huge impact on my life. So for example, my definition of a success, like this is my personal one, what I term as success is being my integrated, authentic self. And so that is a guiding light for me. If I'm looking at something, if I'm looking at an opportunity, it may be financially rewarding, but if it takes me away from being my authentic self, then immediately to me it's a failure if I went to go down that path. And so having that clarity is everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adrian, I wanted your opinion also on the concept of self improvement and really how essential it is to make that a personal choice and really making a personal investment in ourselves, because if we're not working on ourselves on a constant basis, it's hard to show up at other aspects of our lives, in my view. So talk about the importance of making a self investment in yourself and how important it is to make that a priority as well.
I think it's more important than anything else. It's the top of the list above everything else. The reason I say that is because as a business owner, and as a business owner whose business has grown like quite quickly, I've recognized that at any one point, the biggest bottleneck to the business and the business bottleneck to its growth is me. Like that business, I just know will not grow beyond my personal growth. Like it won't. And so it's a very constant daily reminder that if I want to continue to grow this, then I have to continue to grow as a person. And that same principle applies to other areas of your life, financially, with relationships, spiritually, health and physically as well. You are always the biggest bottleneck. And so by prioritizing yourself, by being a little bit more selfish and prioritizing your personal development and personal growth, you're able to become a lot more selfless and to serve others. I mean, we don't serve others by remaining small. We don't serve others by not becoming our best self. So I see it almost as a moral duty for all of us that by putting ourselves first, that's the very best thing that we can do. And just as a side note, Kevin, the term self-help, you didn't use it. You used self-development, which I think is absolutely right. But I've got a real bugbear against the term self-help because it implies something's wrong with us. Like there's nothing wrong with us. We are perfect the way we are. But it's about bringing out, new aspects and more authentic aspects of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Adrian, I'm curious to know your definition of, or how do you think prosperity and hope are interconnected in life?
I think they're hugely connected. Happiness, I believe, comes from having something that you are aspiring to and the hope that that aspiration will come to be, not necessarily a material one. So it's not about having a certain car or a certain size house. It could simply be, like being more true to yourself. That's a wonderful aspiration to have. And I think as we are, like, true happiness is striving towards something towards those aspirations, but also being happy where we are now. It's that balance. We're happy where we are now, but we're also happy as we're striving towards the accomplishment of that particular thing. And with that comes prosperity. Like with that comes not just the financial prosperity, but the emotional fulfillment and well-being. That's where it comes from. So without those aspirations, it's very hard to have hope, and without that hope, it's very hard to have the inner prosperity that comes with it.
Yeah, and Adrian, for you, I'm fascinated to ask you, what's the best part about being a dad?
The being a dad. There's so many. I mean, from a personal perspective, I'm learning all of these new things about myself that I never, ever thought possible. I just never thought possible. And so that's been very rewarding, again, to someone who prioritizes personal growth above everything else. But also seeing this, wonderful human come into the world, and as they develop and grow, and knowing that, like in the case of Evie, like she's mine, but she's not mine. Like it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Absolutely. It's the best and most important job you'll ever have, right? Being a
Really
dad.
is. Really is, yeah.
And Adrian, just before we end our conversation today, I know before we started recording today, you shared with me that you live down the street from Windsor Castle. So I'm curious to ask you, because as King Charles takes over the monarchy, I'm curious to ask you, because one of his goals was sort of to modernize the way we look at the monarchy and the way they conduct their business. So I'm wondering your thoughts on whether you think it can be done, and whether people's perception of the place of the monarchy has changed since King Charles took over as well.
Yeah, I think it absolutely can be done in terms of the perception of monarchy and sort of modernizing it. I feel like King Charles's sons, so Prince William, Prince Harry, do a wonderful job of doing this, and there's been a lot of controversy about Prince Harry with some of his personal life choices, but I just see it as they're his life choices, is his life. I think those two boys do a remarkable job of bringing the monarchy into the modern world and changing our perception. The perception of the monarchy used to be as a totalitarian sort of ruler, but it's not that anymore. It's more of a figurehead of our country. And I think it's very early days for King Charles. I'm not sure whether he would achieve his objective in his reign as king, as it's purely, down to a time thing. Like it takes time to modernize, and so it could take 30, 40 years to do it. But yeah, I'm proud. I'm very proud of the of the British royal family and the true sort of royalist in which I like what they stand for, and I think it makes the country a better place for it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, Adrian, my final question for you today has to do with your own personal and professional legacy and how you want that to be defined.
Yeah, it's for a long time I was highly driven by what my legacy would be, and then I feel like I've reached a place now where I'm less concerned with what my legacy will be and more concerned with living a good life that will inspire people. The legacy will be what it will be. I'm probably more focused on doing what I can today. We've had a I mean, remarkable is not the right word. We've had a terrible year in many ways, with so many close family members and friends, unfortunately, passing away in the most extreme and unexpected circumstances. And it just makes you realize that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. There really is like sort of, oh, I'll do that tomorrow, but like there is no tomorrow. And live for today, but live a good life, like live a good life. And by that I mean being true to who you are, and not doing harm, to other people.
It's important to maximize the moment, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, it hit home very hard this year.
Well, because a life isn't a forever contract, right?
Well, if you can see the poster behind me above my shoulder,
Yeah.
so this is essentially a countdown calendar. It goes to 85 rows, and each row represents, or each square in the row represents 1 week. And so there's 85 years, and it's essentially a visual representation on if you were to live to the year of 85. And you can see I'm about halfway through already, and so it's a daily reminder that we're not infinite, we're not immortal, that the clock is ticking, and to bloody well make the most of it.
Absolutely. And Adrian, finally, tell me if people want to get connected with the good work that you do, my friend, what's the best way they can do that?
Yep. So Instagram is by far the best way to follow me and to connect with me. My handle is Adrian J Knight, and that's Knight with a K. I'm very active on there. I post several times a day on my stories, and I mean, every post, like every day, starts with a screenshot of my phone at 4 a.m. In the morning, and I'm very sort of open about this is my personal development routine, and this is how I go into my day. And then I also share a lot about inside the businesses we've acquired and deals we're looking at. So it's quite rounded, really. But Instagram by far is the best.
Fabulous. Well, Adrian, I really enjoyed our international conversation about personal development, personal growth, and your own life journey as well. Your work in the space of personal development and business acquisition is most appreciated, and I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me and for the privilege of your time. It's most appreciated, my friend.
Oh no, Kevin, I'm beyond grateful. It's been from Windsor to Windsor. So and thank you so much for everything you're doing. You are so inspirational, motivational with everything you're doing and that you have done. And I've got no doubts that you've barely begun on your journey of inspiring others. So thank you so much for having me on this. It's a true honor.